I'm limited in what I can respond to that, only because there's ongoing cases, but I can assure you that all of us up here are looking to see if there is a conspiracy of some kind, organization. There is some evidence we've seen that I don't want to share at this time, and it's not because I don't want to talk to you about it. It's because we're focused on arresting those individuals involved and bringing the best cases forward. Some of them may be to the district attorney, but highly likely to the U.S. attorney, where we're working with some of our federal partners to look at that angle of exactly what you're asking for.
Then a quick follow-up to the chief. And
really
this
works
is coming from somebody who's been here for several days and have watched how your law enforcement officers have conducted themselves and have used less lethal rounds, from my perspective, only after being agitated by other people throwing things. However, there is a video now circulating online of less lethal methods being used on a woman, not quite a protester, standing very close to officers, being fired at with less lethal methods. Also a caveat that we do see these police officers give her multiple warnings, but I'm wondering if you can comment on the use of those methods at such a close distance as someone that did not seem to be posing much of a threat.
Yeah, you know, I can't speak to that individual case because I'm not aware what the follow-up was. But each one of these we see generates an investigative follow-up. We will look into it thoroughly and then, you know, look for all the video we possibly can out there, body-worn video on the officers, and then a video from the environment there, and put together as best we can what the circumstances were.
Perhaps then you could speak to people out there who may not understand that a warning's a warning, or that maybe officers would take that step.
Yeah, you know, thank you for that. The bottom line is, once we give a dispersal order, it's because things have gotten out of hand and we're trying to restore order, and you are ordered to leave that area, and the officers are going to clear that area. And some of the tactics used involve less lethal munitions. And certainly, while they're way more accurate than they were in years past, certainly there's also times where they potentially hit a target that was not the intended target. So if you're in the environment, you're supposed to
leave. Not sure if now you can hear me or not. The software here is being a little bit weird with the microphones.
dispatch for that, so once we free up
on that question, just trying to understand, does that mean that you guys have begun use of force reviews on some of these incidents?
Oh yeah, whenever anything happens of significance, we start looking at it right away, try and capture all the video we can, any other evidence we can right away.
We're going to take a couple more questions.
There's one particular question I wanted to ask. There was an arrest of Luz Aguilar. I believe she's an aide to one of our council members. I was wondering if there was any information regarding that arrest, if there were any charges that were posted for her and her sister, Antonia Aguilar.
Was it when you talked about? No. Yeah, no, I'll have to follow up with you to see what those, if there were charges filed or not on that one.
Maybe if the sheriff could just clarify what he had said earlier to the question about the National Guard now being given authorization to detain people. How would it work then, I suppose, and it sounded like from the previous answer you were saying they're only really there to detain those that are causing harm to federal officers, but I don't know, how would a handoff work to local law enforcement if the National Guard was to detain, say, a protester?
Let me clarify that. What's been communicated to me thus far, and we are asking for more specific communication from the Army, which the National Guard is falling under them now, along with the Marines, is that they've expressed to us that they have their mission is split up into 3 areas. That it is to protect federal functions, to protect federal facilities, and to protect federal personnel. And as far as I know, and again, we are all in meetings trying to increase our communication and coordination with them. So we're still asking for specific clarification. My understanding at this point is that they do not have the powers to arrest or detain. So if they are out in the field, they may be there, but they're working in conjunction with federal authorities. It could be ICE, Border Patrol. There's a whole host of acronym federal agencies that they're working with. But again, not knowing that specific incident, that's where communication and coordination is critical.
Sheriff, do you know, are the Marines here? I've been hearing since Sunday they've been on their way. And what are we at, Wednesday?
I would be guessing if I try to answer that. Again, I'm just going to leave it at this. We are doing everything we can. I know Chief McDonald and I and our staffs are doing everything we can to improve our communication with the Army, so we would know those specific questions. And they were just activated, I think, what was it, Sunday? So there's a lot going on behind the scenes. And first of all, I just tell you, I've never served in the military. I have nothing but respect for people in the military, whether they're soldiers in the National Guard or Marines. They are our soldiers. So we're doing our best to put them and ourselves, and primarily our community, in a position so that we succeed together moving forward. Because frankly, we're all in an extremely difficult situation right now that none of us have ever been involved in, including the military.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Assistant District Attorney
And we'll continue to follow the top headlines from around the country and around the world here on Live Now from Fox. I'm Andy Mack. We're back after this.
In the meantime, let's bring into the conversation now our colleague and friend there, national security analyst and expert and retired Marine intelligence officer, Hal Kemper. He joins me. Hal, thanks for being with us. I know you're traveling, but we had to get you on for a second night in a row here as we continue to look at these live images there in downtown Los Angeles. Hal, we have to acknowledge this. I'm sure you've acknowledged it. The Marines not on ground yet. What do you make of that?
Well, what I understand is they're just outside of Los Angeles. They're undergoing training and preparation or to go into the city. I don't read too much into it other than it's the planning process. You know, the National Guard gets training in civil disturbance on a regular basis. It's something they do. Usually they do it in state active duty status, working under the governor. In that regard, they are not held under posse comitatus, that federal law that says the military can't do law enforcement. In this case, they're federalized. Doesn't mean they didn't get the training in civil disturbance. Marines, on the other hand, this is an unusual training set, if you will. It's not that Marines have not been trained in civil disturbance. I know for a fact Marines have been trained in this many times, and they've been trained it for here in the U.S. and overseas, but it's just not part of the regular training curriculum. So what they did is they brought them in. I think part of it, too, is there's a lot of forces that have been brought in under this Task Force 51 to go into Los Angeles, and I'm seeing the normal sort of organizational issues of getting forces deployed to certain areas and set up and self-sustainable and all the other things that go with that. So I think there's kind of a deliberate process here of movement onward to wherever they got to go. And so they're staged right outside of LA, but they could come in rather quickly. One thing I would say is I haven't seen the protests spark up in such a way that there's an exigent need to put them in sooner. And I think that's something that has to be taken into consideration.
So this was posted about under an hour ago that, according to the LAPD, the Central Division, there are 3 separate demonstrations occurring at this hour, and they say to expect delays at some of these intersections and street corners here. You see there Temple and First Street, Temple and Aliso, and First Street from Main Street there. They say about 150 people on bicycles riding westbound. Haven't necessarily seen that throughout this. We've seen them on scooters and the like, but also LA County Sheriff saying this: to avoid protest area, that a demonstration is underway in downtown Los Angeles, saying to please avoid the area due to heavy traffic and potential delays, saying use alternate routes and stay updated via official sources. So Hal, I think this is kind of a bare bones question here, if you can help us, because I've been having trouble with distinguishing who these law enforcement entities are with respect to their uniforms, what they wear, the badges on their shoulders and the like here. So who are these? What jurisdiction are these individuals from?
I'm trying to make it out right now. I will tell you that LAPD is out there. LA County Sheriff's is out there. They are bringing in other jurisdictions under mutual aid out there as well. A lot of these other jurisdictions, and these might be, I'm taking a look here, it looks like those are National Guard, I believe.
The shield that they're holding says California National Guard.
Yeah, so they're National Guard, but there are, but some of them in the back are clearly not. They're probably local police department. I would mention, this is part of an ongoing discussion that's been going back for 30 or 40 years, which is the militarization of law enforcement, where they have units that wear, you know, what look like military uniforms. They wear helmets, they've got body armor, everything. And from a distance, many times it's very difficult to see whether they are actually military or law enforcement, particularly in this situation, because we actually have military in these areas. And I have heard it misreported at times that they thought there was military that was in direct contact or doing stuff with the protesters. In actuality, it was law enforcement that was dressed up in what appears to be, you know, military or paramilitary uniforms that are part of their usually special enforcement or their SWAT type presence. So, though, you know, that you saw right there was with the California National Guard. Those are California National Guard, albeit they are in federalized status. What I would point out that's interesting is the shields say California National Guard. Normally, when they're doing a mission like this, they would be in state status.
Okay.
And that's why they would distinguish the fact that they are California National Guard, kind of showing that state status, working for the governor, where they are not fall under posse comitatus rules against law enforcement. However, those are the only shields they got. So
Sure.
Even though they got federalized, those are the shields they have.
So Hal, I've seen photos, and maybe we can put some of them up on X, from Homeland Security, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Los Angeles, that the National Guard,
Meantime, the
that
Senate
was
debated a
federalized,
separate.
the California National Guard, has been used to protect federal employees, i.e. ICE agents, from carrying out raids. We've seen that. that's been documented in photographs. We also have seen the National Guard protect federal buildings, like in downtown Los Angeles. We've seen that. That's what we're seeing right now. Does the federalized National Guard have the power to detain protesters, Hal?
Yes, they do. That's one of those things. Posse comitatus is a really small body of law. It's like one very small paragraph, a couple of key sentences. What they can't do is they can't arrest the protesters. However, and this has happened many, many times, they're out there doing security stuff. Protesters get in their face. They pose a threat, whatever. What can they do? Well, obviously, they can respond with force. But the other thing they can do is they can detain. Now, they can't arrest, and they need to move them into law enforcement custody as quickly as possible whenever they do that.
It's better.
I don't know if there's a hard and fast rule on how long they can detain them. I don't recall there being anything statutorily that says it has to be X number of minutes or hours or whatever. But they can detain them. They just can't do anything that would be done by a sworn peace officer in terms of arresting them or anything like that. But they can detain them on site, and that will happen as you have federal troops protecting ICE agents doing these raids, which we had talked about when this whole thing kicked off, that appeared to be a mission that they were going to be doing, that they would be detaining people. And
so this is what I'm talking about, Hal, this photo right here of a National Guard member on hand while an ICE arrest is happening. So you're saying that that's not all too unusual?
No, that's not. Well, the whole thing is a little bit unusual, but yeah, that is actually a mission that would be normally expected, and there are rules of force and procedures that they have to go through in terms of detaining. But what you're seeing there is law enforcement actually arresting the individual. The federal troop is providing security. Now, the federal troop, if there wasn't law enforcement there and they were providing security, they could potentially detain them. I think within that, they could probably even, there's certain things they could do to restrain them if they were unruly or violent or something like that, like maybe put on flex cuffs or something. And that would be perfectly permissible. What they can't do is they can't put them under arrest. They can't read them their rights. They can't do any of that. They can't book them or do any of the things that a sworn law enforcement officer or a law enforcement officer would do in that regard.
Okay.
And so that's the limitation right now. Now, if President Trump was to impose the Insurrection Act, that would change the situation. But he has not done that. He certainly made noise, or I should say, put out rhetoric that indicates he's very clearly considering that at some point.
Yeah.
But he has not done that.
All right, Al, let's talk about the curfew in place. It'll be in place now tonight for a second night, starting at 8 p.m. local time. Do curfews work? I know you've been around crowd control, and so you are a really good resource with respect to that. When it went into effect last night, there was some type of grace period, but it eventually seemingly worked here. Will it work a second night? Do curfews work? That's my question.
Curfews tend to work. In fact, curfews are, we use them all over the world. We had curfews when we went to Iraq. There were curfews. Curfews work. And what curfews really do is they say they get any potential threat, if you will, off the streets. Or if they are on the streets during a curfew, then they've clearly identified themselves as someone who has first decided to violate the curfew. Does that mean they're an active threat? Well, it does mean that they can be detained, that they can be stopped, and there are certain conditions that you have that you wouldn't have if it was just a regular day and people were out on the streets. So you're saying, look, you cannot be in this area at this period of time. And if somebody is in that area, it is understood that they will be taken into custody or detained or something like that. Okay. So it kind of clears action, if you will. It really, it helps law enforcement across the board basically control an area in a way that they couldn't control it if there wasn't a curfew in place.
So if the clock strikes 8:01 in Los Angeles tonight, and there are protesters still out there liable to be arrested, to be detained, that's what you're saying?
They could be. They could be. I'm sure they just go up and they say, hey, it's 8:01. You need to get out of here. And sometimes, honestly, the protesters are out there and they're kind of making a statement stuff, but they don't all want to go to jail. They don't all want to get detained. I mean, there are some that want to make a statement and get arrested and things like that. But for the most part, usually depending on I should say the tempo of what's going on and the fervor of the crowd, that usually around that transition period, they'll move out there. We certainly saw this in previous protests where it got to the time where they were supposed to get off the streets and it was clearly communicated to them, hey, it's time to go. You got to clear this area.
Okay.
And normally they will, not always, but I will say this, if they start wantonly violating their curfew, if they are out there doing vandalism and violence and stuff after the curfew, well, that's a dangerous shift in the situation. And honestly, that's something that President Trump might cite in his decision-making process.
I want to put up this post by our colleague at Fox 11, reporter Matthew Seedorf, saying this: more than 220 people were arrested in downtown Los Angeles Tuesday. That's yesterday. This includes a person accused of pointing a laser at an LAPD helicopter, one assault with a deadly weapon on a police officer, and 3 people illegally in possession of firearms. Hal, what do you make of that? 3 people who were detained, who were arrested, they had guns on them during this protest. How does that happen?
All 3 of the things that they pointed out there are very serious. Obviously, the firearms jumps out, but I would say assault with a deadly weapon. Look, a brick can be a very deadly weapon. A metal pole can be a deadly weapon. Incredible mayhem can be caused by that. But I want to point out one that doesn't get enough attention. That laser at a helicopter, that right there is a felony. If they laze a helicopter, they can dazzle, which means blind or temporarily blind the pilots in a helicopter. You could imagine the potential hazard that poses if the pilots of the helicopter can't see when they're flying in an urban area with tall buildings trying to do stuff. That is a very serious crime, and so all 3 of those things are very serious crimes, and hopefully putting that out there will quell that kind of stuff. But it also says another thing too. They're looking actively, and they should be. They're looking actively to find out if anybody in the crowd is carrying a firearm, and it's good that they were able to do that.
Yeah.
And hopefully that will deter anyone else from doing something really as dangerous and just plainly stupid as going to a protest with a firearm.
So, Hal, I'm not entirely sure if this next question is the right question to ask you, but I'm going to ask it anyway because it's becoming a frequent topic of conversation, especially on Capitol Hill, from Republican lawmakers especially, whether or not these protests are so organized that they are paid for by certain activist groups here. In what you have seen with regard to the formulation of the protests, do you think they're decentralized or centralized? Is there a top leadership chart in the organization all the way on down? Or no, is it more organic than what we're seeing? What say you on that question?
That's actually a very good question. And I understand the FBI is actually actively investigating that to find that out. I'm going to say one thing about protests, and we've seen this. We saw this going back some years back with Antifa, for example, would be out there protesting, and it would look like a spontaneous protest. But when you start looking at various different protests, you start to see the same individuals show up in different locations, and it looked like they were doing things like command and control. So there are those out there who are, dare I say, professional protesters, in some cases professional rioters, if you will. They go in there and they take advantage of these situations. I have no doubt there are some on the ground here who really don't have a strong feeling one way or the other about the topic du jour, but they see it as an opportunity to protest. And in the past, we have found a lot of control, communications between them, which doesn't have to be elaborate. I mean, it can be literally, certainly we've had discussions about senior administration officials using Signal, if you will, to communicate things they shouldn't. Well, they also do the same thing. They'll be using various apps and stuff to communicate things back and forth with the crowd and orchestrate things. And that is pretty much protest 101. We've seen that with protests over the many years. Now, is this funded by some entity? Are there paid protesters out there? I've seen stuff pop up in the media, where just kind of speculation and things like that. I haven't seen anything yet which shows that this is clearly an orchestrated type of thing.
Okay.
Clearly looked like it was kind of spontaneous on the ground. But
Sure.
once you have something like this happen, there is an invitation to those who like to exploit events like this to do things.
Okay.
And they may step in some way.
Hal, last question. They keep coming to me. I know I'm extremely interested in this, as so many viewers are. Is there a shelf life on the emergency, so to speak? I'm not going to ask when this is all going to be said and done. We don't know that. That's impossible to foretell here. But Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, was on Capitol Hill yet again for day 2 of his testimony, and he was asked, how long will the Marines be in this kind of limbo deployment, ready to go if needed? How long does that last? How long can the president keep a state's National Guard in a federalized status? Do we know that?
Well, I will say this. I've heard them say 60 days. I've heard that out there. They're saying this is initially. I think I have not seen a copy of the orders, but it sounds like the orders were initially for 60 days with the, certainly they'd always have the option to extend. How long can you keep National Guard in federalized status? Well, you can keep them in federalized status for years if you wanted. There's really no cap on that. And if you want to go back to World War II, the National Guard troops got federalized and they stayed there until the war was over, plus 6 months. So there's a long time you can do this. But really the cap, the ticking clock in the background is one is a law, as we mentioned on the, as we've talked about, it's called the U.S. Economy Act. It's one of the, when I was doing this, where I was coordinating military support of civil authorities in all its various incarnations, 2 things you looked at. One is you can't violate posse comitatus if they're in federal status. The other was the Economy Act, which basically says that you've got to look for the most economical source of goods and services. Why? Because the military is extremely expensive. And Congress back in the early 30s didn't want various agencies always going to the military to do stuff because it's really expensive, very capable, but really expensive. So there's some things that have to happen. The Secretary of Defense and probably the other secretaries involved, the supporting and supported secretaries, I should say, or cabinet members, have to sign off on a waiver to allow this presence to continue to allow the use of military forces for this particular mission. That's kind of that's a de rigueur administrative step they have to take.
Okay.
But at some point there, Congress will look at it. The courts might look at it and say, did you really need federal troops out there doing this? Could you have found another way to do this? So there is overview. So that's kind of the ticking clock, but there isn't like you got to get them out there in 2 weeks or you got to get them out in 30 days. There's nothing like that.
Okay, there does seem to be an as long as it takes quality to some of the comments coming from Secretary Hegseth and even President Trump, so that's why I asked that question. Hal Kemper, as always, thanks so much. We'll talk soon.
Okay.
everyone's talking about this post that was made in the dead of night by Elon Musk. Take a look at this. So this was around 3:40 a.m. Eastern Time. Elon Musk says, "I regret some of my posts about President Trump last week." He says they went too far. So just reading from the piece in the New York Times reporting that Trump and Musk spoke on the phone on Monday night. But you just saw there Musk saying in this post that he regretted some of his posts and comments about President Trump last week, which had led the president to disparage the tech billionaire, a few that played out in real time on social media. Musk said on his X platform some of his posts about Trump went too far. You saw that. Musk called Trump Monday night and they spoke briefly. That's according to a White House official. Now, allies of the two men have been urging them to reconcile. The spat initially focused on Musk's criticism of Trump's signature domestic policy bill, which he condemned as a quote-unquote disgusting abomination because it will add substantially to the national debt. But the spat devolved quickly into petty and outlandish attacks. Musk, for example, suggested that the Trump administration had not released files on Jeffrey Epstein because Trump was named in them. And that was a pretty bombshell report that Musk posted out there for his millions of followers on social media. In the meantime, here we do have a live picture outside the White House as we await for President Trump's departure to the Kennedy Center. We're going to bring into the conversation, though, right now, our friend at Barron's, Al Root. He is kind of our Elon Musk whisperer, so to speak. We talk to Al on all things Elon Musk. So, Al, bear with us. We don't want to miss the president's departure to the Kennedy Center. But I have to ask, is this a thaw? Is this a reset? Is this a détente? How would you describe it?
Hi, Andrew. I like the word détente. I mean, sometimes it seems it was such a wild week. You laid it out quite well. It just sort of played out real time. And, like so much with Elon Musk or Tesla, there's no precedent, right? You don't have a lot of precedent for, the richest person in the world feuding with the most powerful person in the world. It just doesn't happen all that often, if ever. So it was really wild. This détente, I sort of likened it to a bit of a divorce, right? Elon has left his position, and there was a very close relationship, and then it deteriorated very, very quickly. And now they're sort of on the other side where they're sort of getting back together for the kids and being civil. So I wouldn't expect Elon to have sort of the kind of role he had in the Trump administration in the early days.
Let's see what's
but
going
I
on
think
in
we've
Israel.
reached sort of a more happy equilibrium. I'm just surprised that this entire thing unfolded in basically the course of a week.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was a surprise to many that Elon Musk posted that, like I said, in the dead of night. And maybe, we're just coming to this for viewers for the first time. Maybe they didn't see that post just yet because I was struck by that because we were speaking just, last Thursday. It got very nasty, very personal. And now we're hearing from some of the reporting that allies of both of them were working.
Reason to bother getting back together. Why do these two need?
Okay.
So, Elon and Donald Trump, President Trump, don't always agree, right? They disagree a little bit on tariffs. They disagree on national debt and the big, beautiful They disagree a little bit on tariffs. They disagree on national debt and the big, beautiful. They disagree a little bit on tariffs. They disagree on national debt and the big, beautiful bill. And those disagreements sort of coexisted. Musk's position of, being the richest person in the world is still a position.
Musk's federal contracts, do you think those are over?
A little bit of a delay of spark.
There's always so much going
Jumping.
on. So the EV tax credit, that is removed in the big, beautiful bill. The purchase tax credit, that's $7,500. You go out and purchase tax credit, that's $7,500. You go out and lease an EV. That's available to any EV. I think that's going to go. People knew about that. So that's one of the things people say, contracts. The SpaceX stuff, SpaceX gets a lot of money from the government. I personally, pound the table. They earned that money. I mean, remember, they just took the astronauts back from the the International Space Station.
Right.
SpaceX is the dominant launch provider in the world. It's not going to save the U.S. a lot of money, and SpaceX is sort of the global leader in that business, so that doesn't make a lot of sense. You could lose some defense business in the future for SpaceX if this feud continued. But again, I think those threats were more just in the heat of the fight versus anything that would come to fruition and sort of impact one of the companies.
Yeah, and just to give viewers a sense, we're 10 minutes past the top of the hour. We're waiting for the president and the first lady to depart the White House for the Kennedy Center for the opening premiere of Les Mis tonight. We were kind of discussing the changes that the Trump administration has made to kind of the Kennedy Center leadership board and its direction. So, Al, I might have to cut you off if we see the first couple, but I have to ask you this. What about the complexion of Doge now? What is its mission now? Is it the same without him?
I think the honest answer, first of all, I can't believe I would be preempted for the president. What's going on? I think the honest answer is Doge will lose some of the impetus behind it without a figure like Musk. Musk clashed very publicly with Marco Rubio. He is very dedicated to the cuts. He believes very deeply in reducing the budget. And, I might feel that way too, but I'm not Elon Musk. So I think that Doge will continue. They'll continue to rack up savings. I think it might morph into sort of modernizing government systems, right? Making them more computer-based and user-friendly. So there'll be reports about that. But, remember, Musk said, aspirationally, 2 trillion, 1 trillion, let's save this much money, fraud, waste, and abuse. I think those numbers are sort of gone. And so now we're looking at more modest savings and sort of just a more modest Doge effort.
So, Al, what about Musk's supporters that he brought into the Trump White House? I'm talking about David Sachs. We know how his preferred NASA pick, Jared Isaacman, we know how that ended. Trump withdrew his name from consideration to lead NASA. Where do they stand in the Trump orbit? Will they also be on the way out soon?
Well, Isaac, to your point, Isaac, that was one of the straws that may or may not have broken the camel's back, depending on what you believe. So that was a bit of a surprise and a sign that things were fraying. On the David Sachs of it all, I think that from a cryptocurrency perspective, this administration will continue to go down some of the roads, and David Sachs is sort of an advisor on that front. So tough to say. I could see somebody like David Sachs sticking around, and some of the other advisors, people who work at Doge, carrying on. So I don't think it's sort of a clean house moment.
Okay.
And again, I think the feud sort of settling down gives everybody the ability to sort of figure out what they really want to do next. But on the, the crypto stuff, I think that'll continue in this administration. Doge is a lessened impetus, and then Musk will just sort of fade into the background and be a supporter from afar. That would be my prediction.
My observation here, while we're watching this live picture, this camera outside the White House, before this disagreement between Musk and Trump, this would be one of the kind of key events, kind of your standard event that you would see Musk accompany Trump to, wouldn't you? You're not going to see that much anymore, I would imagine.
No, I don't think he'll be taking up space at Mar-a-Lago like he was. And if you remember, if you go sort of all the way back, these things play out in weeks and days. So all the way back to April, or even reporting in March that Musk was going to transition, go back to his companies. President Trump said in a news conference, eventually he'll want to go back to his companies. Then in April on Tesla's conference call, he said, listen, I'm going to step back. I'm going to spend more time running my companies. He's very busy. He's got robo-taxis. He's got Starship. He's got XAI and X merging. So he's got a lot to do. And then, there was the press conference at the White House where he got the key to the White House. They thanked each other. And then it sort of deteriorated. So, there was this process of sort of stepping back and spending more time at his companies. And I think from a Musk perspective and from an investor perspective, from his businesses, that's what you'll see. You'll see him more focused on his companies. He's obviously remained relatively political.
All right, we may have lost Al Root's signal there, unfortunately. We'll see if it corrects itself. That happens sometimes during these live Zoom interviews. We're at the mercy of the technology here. In the meantime, though, we do have this live picture still yet again as we await President Trump and the First Lady's departure from the White House to the Kennedy Center. Speaking of the Kennedy Center, we also have a live picture there on the red carpet for the Kennedy Center Gala, which will premiere tonight. Les Miserables, of course. Personally, just one of my favorite musicals. And so we've been seeing some of these Trump cabinet secretaries come and go. We're working on getting Al Root back just so he can finish his point here. I think we might have him back. And so, Al, we're at the mercy of Zoom technology. But, Al, if you could just finish your point.
Where'd I leave off?
You were talking about whether or not we'll be seeing Musk with Trump much at all.
Yeah, I was talking to myself there for a second. I think that, part of this healing I was saying, happened on X when Musk started liking some of President Trump's posts criticizing Gavin Newsom. Musk supported the president's policy on the LA riots. So I would think that you would see more of that sort of support from afar, and that Musk would remain focused on his companies, which is what investors wanted when he started talking about all the way back in April. So I would say that Musk will go back to sort of being a businessman who supports Trump, and a little more publicly than other people, because Musk is Musk and he values his ability to say what he wants when he wants, and you'll see that sort of show up on the X platform. But I don't think there will be as many Les Mis visits, Mar-a-Lago visits, a little X in the Oval Office, Musk's young son that comes. So you'll probably see less of that.
All right, Al Root, can't thank you enough. I know we went a little long there. Always appreciate your insight. We'll talk soon. Thanks, Al.
Thanks, Andrew.
And welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Andrew Kraft. As we approach the top of the next hour, I wanted to take the time. I know so many music fans are really reeling after the loss of who is being described as a musical legend. I'm talking, of course, about Brian Wilson, rather, the founder of the Beach Boys, the visionary and fragile leader whose genius for melody, arrangements, and wide-eyed self-expression inspired the songs Good Vibrations, California Girls, and other summertime anthems. The Associated Press is calling him the poet laureate of summer. Fox's Julie Banderas has more.
He was the beach boy behind California Girls, Good Vibrations, and Surfin' USA. Brian Wilson was born on June 20th, 1942 in Inglewood, California. At age 3, Brian could sing on key to his mother's piano playing. The self-taught sopranist preferred to learn music by listening to records. However, at age 11, an examination revealed he had suffered significant hearing loss in his right ear. Wilson later said his condition was the result of years of abuse from his father. In 1959, Wilson enrolled in junior college, but dropped out after a year to pursue his passion for music. Brian and his two brothers, Carl and Dennis, decided to form a band. They asked good friends Al Jardine and Mike Love to join. Their first single, Surfin', rose to number 75 on Billboard's singles chart, and Capitol Records immediately signed the group. In 1963, Brian met Marilyn Rovell from the pop trio The Honeys. The two fell in love and were married a year later. They had two daughters, Carney and Wendy. In 1966, the Beach Boys released Pet Sounds and Good Vibrations, both written and produced by Brian. In 1974, the Beach Boys released another #1 album, Endless Summer, and were riding the wave of success. However, offstage, Brian struggled with his newfound fame and developed a serious addiction to drugs and alcohol. His marriage suffered as well. In December of 1983, brother Dennis died tragically in a drowning accident in California. In 1986, his life and career got back on track, and 2 years later, the Beach Boys were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. In 1995, Brian found love again, this time with former model Melinda Ledbetter. Wilson made a comeback in 1998 and continued to make music through 2008. Brian Wilson's moving lyrics and catchy melodies swept his listeners away. Julie Banderas, Fox News.
Julie, thanks so much. What a life. What a tribute. We want to talk about it even further with our friend and colleague there at Fox 9 in Minneapolis, Adam Lawrence. He joins me. Adam, you're also a fan as well, and you've been following so much of the tributes pouring in. I want to put up some of them that we've compiled here on social media, and there are so many. And you see there, I'm going to read out some of them from the Reagan Presidential Library. You see there from Sean Lennon, of course, the son of John and Yoko, and so many. Mick Fleetwood as well, Keith Richards too. Adam, your first thoughts on the passing of Wilson?
Instrumental from God only knows. It really is touching, and this was a guy. Look, I'm 33 years old, and Brian Wilson's music and the Beach Boys' music has touched me. I was born in Los Angeles, and Brian Wilson, you know, it's not very often that we can say somebody was really a voice of a city. I think it's safe to say that Brian Wilson was the voice of Los Angeles, certainly the voice of Southern California. As Julia mentioned, they're born in Inglewood at Centinela Hospital, and co-founded the Beach Boys along with his brothers and their cousin Mike Love and their friend Al, and really just created this sound that has lasted now generations. And I think it's safe to say that their music will be going on for generations to come. You know, the songs that get all of the headlines there, Andrew, are a lot of the surfer songs that were first up for them in the 1960s. Obviously, Julia mentioned their first hit, Surfin', and then Surfin' USA, where they list out all of the great surfing spots in Southern California: Redondo Beach, Doheny Way down at Dana Point, La Jolla down in San Diego. those surfing songs really encapsulated an entire generation of Southern Californians. One that my parents belonged to in the 1960s, where the car was at the focal point of life there, and a lot of their songs, She's Real Fine, My 409, Little Deuce Coupe, Little Honda. Obviously, we talked about the surfing music, the romance songs, Help Me Rhonda, All Summer Long, Ba 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 Barbara Brand. I mean, these are songs that are a part of the American songbook now, and really kind of captured the imaginations, like I said, of an entire region and an entire culture of people. And I think it's safe to say that Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys are really responsible, as much as really anything else, for really expanding Southern California culture, not just here in the United States, but really around the world through their music.
Yeah, Adam, I was struck by that. The Associated Press has it that the Beach Boys rank among the most popular groups of the rock era, with more than 30 singles in the top 40 and worldwide sales of more than 100 million. And you could make the argument that they were coming up at the same time as the Beatles in the mid-'60s, and they were purely Americana, really distinguishing this Southern California voice, the Southern California sound that is timeless, is multi-generational, that people are still listening to.
Absolutely. And it was, like you mentioned there, Andrew, the emergence of Beatlemania and the Beatles coming onto the American shores that really kind of inspired the Beach Boys to not so much surf away, shift away from their surfer music. I listed a lot of their great songs. You got to throw in there the Beach Boys Christmas album. Obviously, everybody knows Little Saint Nick, but, Merry Christmas Baby and Christmas Day were also great tunes from that. But when the Beatles came to the United States, that really kind of forced the Beach Boys not so much to reinvent themselves per se, but really, as Brian put it in an interview later, to step on the gas and really kind of make themselves a more whole, a more full sort of complete band. And that transition is really encapsulated in 1966 album Pet Sounds. Andrew, I consider it perhaps the greatest album ever recorded in American music. I know there are a lot of people out there that will agree with me on that. These songs really kind of shifted from that laid-back surfer vibe into more instrumental melodies and harmonies that really kind of focused on songwriting, lyrical presentation, and really sort of the music that's behind the voices. We have a lot of people out there that consider themselves singer-songwriters. Brian Wilson was truly the definition of that, and his sort of masterpiece sort of work would have been Pet Sounds right there. The lead song, Wouldn't It Be Nice? Just a beautiful, beautiful hymn that really kind of yearns for a more youthful longing to get older there. Let's Go Away for a While, completely instrumental. God Only Knows, Andrew, that's a song that you and I have probably heard at weddings before. Yeah. Sloop John B., which was a traditional Caribbean folk hymn that the Beach Boys kind of reinvented and put into their own sound. And then obviously, like I said, like the reporter said earlier, later in 1966, Good Vibrations. These are songs that are now a part, like I said, of the American songbook, and songs that generations to come will all be listening to.
Yeah, I mean, his musicology, his discography is just so vast, and it was a difficult life. We don't have to dwell on some of those aspects. Julie Banderas highlighted some of those that came with the fame of the Beach Boys. And he had kind of multiple acts in his life as far as his music career goes. So I really thought that was so comprehensive. But really, to your point, Adam, he is in kind of the pantheon of these musical greats, distinctly American. Adam, thanks so much. Good to see you. Talk soon.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Appreciate you all.
All right. In the meantime, our final note on this. This is how the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is remembering on social media Brian Wilson. Let's play this for you.
Over the years, the Beach Boys have been in style and out of style and in style again. But what kept me going is the same thing that got me to write Surfing all those years ago. I wanted to write joyful music that made other people feel good. That's what I tried to do for the past 27 years. So, we're going to do our best to keep sending out those good vibrations. We want to do the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame proud. And 27 years from now, I'd like to come back and get reinducted all over again.
right, and as you can see there, during the ceremony to induct the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame members in 1988, and you saw there also Mick Jagger and others on hand when Brian Wilson was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And so we send our thoughts, our condolences to his family, his friends, and his legion of fans. All right, I'm Andrew Kraft. We're in a new hour. Let's take our first commercial break. Still so much more to get to in 2 minutes. And welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Andrew Kraft. All right, out to the Kennedy Center, red carpet there. Take a look at this. The second couple, Vice President Vance, Second Lady Usha Vance, as we wait for President Trump and the First Lady to depart the White House, which they have not done just yet here. So you can see, actually, let's listen. The Vice President is speaking just a little bit.
He's right behind me now giving some remarks, so I'll try not to speak too loudly to be interrupting him. He's one of many VIP guests here attending as the first...
Okay, so you also see and hear some of the other reporters and hosts on the ground for the red carpet. It's picking up their audio, so you can't really make out what the Vice President is saying. Let's take this shot here as we wait for the first couple to leave the White House, to depart for the Kennedy Center for the season premiere of the production of Les Miserables. Like I said, we're just kind of in a waiting period, not entirely sure when they will leave the White House. We've seen a lot of activity of staffers, Secret Service, and the like kind of come and go from the White House there, but have not yet seen the first couple, though the Beast is parked. It's ready to go in the driveway, so we'll just wait for that. But in the meantime, like I said, we don't want to miss it, but we do have to move on to some more of these other top headlines, including yet another day. Day 2 of testimony on Capitol Hill from the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, on a whole host of topics. This, as so many are wondering, why is the Pentagon drawing down some embassy personnel in places in the Middle East, like in Iraq, Kuwait, and Bahrain as well. So we're going to get into that. I do want to let you listen to just a little bit of some of the testimony from Secretary Hegseth today. Let's watch.
Real time at that moment. We even stood over maps and looked at routes to make sure we were ensuring that routes of Blackhawks were away from the flight path so that it didn't happen again. There are essential reasons why you may need to move along a corridor similar to that, but there is no authorization for VIP or convenience flights along that route. That is not the case and will not remain the case. You have our assurance that I'm working with Secretary Duffy very closely to make sure that the only flights that would be even in a modified path would be those that are necessary and authorized.
And that ban, except for that ban on non-essential flights, including VIP transportation, remains in effect until Secretary Duffy reaches a conclusion if it's possible to fly safely.
We are in direct coordination with Secretary Duffy, and we take his recommendations very seriously and work together. And only where there's a dynamic and ongoing need for the Defense Department would we push back and try to figure out a middle ground.
Thank you, and I compliment you on your response and engagement on January the 29th. I appreciate that very much, including the conversation you and I had that evening.
All right, that's Senator Jerry Moran, the Republican of Kansas, questioning Secretary Hegseth about the deadly midair collision over the Potomac in late January. You'll remember, of course, one of our key stories, horrible stories this year, that Black Hawk Army helicopter that collided with that American Airlines regional jet, talking about some of the routes along the Potomac outside Reagan Airport there. That was kind of the line of questioning you were listening to. Let's bring into the conversation right now someone who covers the Pentagon each and every day there at the Washington Examiner, reporter Mike Brest. He joins me. Mike, thanks for being with us here. Good to see you again. There was a lot involved and detailed in now day 2 of this testimony, this time in front of the Senate. Yesterday, it was in front of the House. What were some of the highlights from Hegseth today? What was he asked?
Thanks for having me on. So one of the primary focuses of the hearing today, as yesterday, was the Pentagon's response and decision to deploy both the National Guard as well as Marines to California regarding the riots there. And so the Secretary remains aggressively in support of both his and the President's decision. He had repeatedly come under attack and question both his and the President's decision regarding both the legalities behind those decisions as well as sort of how it's been implemented, because we've seen so far over about 2,000 National Guards troops deployed already. We've seen about 700 Marines deployed already. And so there are a lot of technicalities and legalities about what these U.S. troops are allowed to do on U.S. soil, given that legally, barring special requirements that the President has to issue, U.S. troops are not legally allowed to operate on U.S. soil. Another topic that came up in today's hearing in particular was the Trump administration's support or lack thereof for Ukraine moving forward. It was Senator and Chairman of the committee, Mitch McConnell, who was the first one to question Secretary Hegseth, who in his very first question asked who the aggressor in the Russia-Ukraine war is, and the Secretary obviously answered with Russia. And then when the chairman of the committee, again, a Republican, but one of the 3 that didn't vote for Secretary Hegseth's confirmation, asked whom he believed the U.S. is rooting for to win the war, and the Secretary didn't answer directly, instead saying that the administration is pursuing peace at all costs. And so that was something that stood out again and was brought up again later in the hearing by Senator Lindsey Graham, another Republican, but a staunch Ukraine defender.
So, Mike, I have to ask this as well. What about Signalgate? And you can remind our viewers what that was. A key story in March. Was he questioned about that? Because from what I'm told, there is an Inspector General report on their investigation into Signalgate coming out very soon at the Pentagon, isn't there?
There is. And so there are a couple things. Number one, it was not a primary point of questioning from either the House committee yesterday or the Senate committee today. The only times it really came up today were in passing from Democrats who were denigrating the Secretary. And so for your audience who may not remember, Signalgate is the story about how the Secretary of Defense posted or shared detailed classified information about upcoming attacks on the Houthis in a Signal group chat. Now, Signal is an encrypted app for messaging, but at the same time, it is not approved by the Department of Defense for the sharing of classified material. And so what we now know is that the Secretary shared some of these details about the impending operation in not one, but 2 group chats, one of which was the one that was widely reported on at the time that featured over a dozen cabinet officials and unknowingly to them, a reporter from The Atlantic. But there's a second group chat that was going on at the same time that featured some of the secretary's advisors, as well as both his wife, his brother, and his personal attorney. Though both his brother and the personal attorney work in the Department of Defense, they are not necessarily in positions that would usually be included in such sensitive information. And so you're right that there is a Department of Defense Inspector General investigation, and they're looking into all of this. And so we're still waiting to see the details of what comes of the investigation, but it's ongoing.
Okay, obviously the reason these cabinet secretaries keep getting hauled before these committees on Capitol Hill is to talk about their budgetary process. Has the Pentagon submitted their budget to the relevant committees, and if not, why not?
So the Pentagon has presented a broad framework of what they expect their defense budget to be. However, they have been slow to roll it out, which is something members of both committees were quick to point out. That being said, it's not uncommon for the first year in any administration to have a delayed budget, given that there's so many new things ongoing. There were a number of critics in today's hearing who were pushing the secretary, given the lack of specificities involved in all of the information they've received thus far.
Okay, Mike, while we have you, and I know you cover the Pentagon extremely closely, there's a lot of reporting, there's a lot of talk about what the Pentagon is doing right now, and you can clarify whether or not this is on a temporary basis or permanent, of drawing down some of the U.S. Embassy personnel in the Middle East over some of these kind of threat postures that are going on. I want to put up this from your contemporary at Reuters, Idris Ali. He covers the Pentagon. He says the U.S. Embassy in Iraq is preparing for an ordered departure due to heightened security risks in the region. That's according to officials. So if you could, Mike, what is going on here? What is the increased threat posture? Do we know?
So a lot of the details are still, I would say, speculative in this phase at this exact moment. But what we do know is that the U.S. and Iran were set to have the latest round of nuclear negotiations this weekend, and we've heard from the president both yesterday and today that he is less optimistic than he was even a week ago about these negotiations working out. And you add in the fact that earlier today, the Iranian defense minister said that if negotiations failed and there was a conflict emerging, all U.S. bases in the region would be at risk. And so while it may not be an exact causation, there's definitely a correlation here between the threat and then the decision that's come out today from both the State Department as well as the Department of Defense about the removal of personnel who are not required to be in the region.
All right, Mike, we just saw President Trump and the First Lady there get into the Beast on his way to the Kennedy Center. Let's just pause briefly. We heard him, or at least we saw him mouth to the press, "Thank you very much." And so let's just hold on this while the Beast travels not too far to the Kennedy Center there in Washington. The First Lady as well in the back with the President. All right, and there it goes. So we're going to hold on that unless it goes to color bars. Mike, last question, though, on all of these moves there. No U.S. troops are being brought back, are they?
Not that has been announced to this point. And so a big part of it is, as your audience will remember, any time that there has been heightened tensions in the Middle East, the U.S. has actually done the opposite. They brought in reinforcements both times when there was posturing and then ultimately an attack from Iran against Israel. Yeah. And so in both of those instances, the U.S. really surged both equipment and personnel to the region. So as they are moving civilians out, we haven't seen any indication that they could be moving more personnel and equipment into the region, but that could be on the table.
All right, Mike Bress, we're going to have to leave it at that. Thanks so much for your time. Talk soon.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, in the meantime here, we're at the bottom of the hour, 3:30 here on the West Coast, 6:30 there in Washington. Let's take a quick commercial break. Let's catch our breaths. A lot more to get to, though, on this busy Wednesday.
Concern for the protesters, for human rights activists, among many others who are extremely concerned about what's happening in the country, and many fear and many say that this country democracy could be at risk. Teresa Bo, Al Jazeera, Los Angeles.
Stay with us here on Al Jazeera. Still to come on the program. Rescue teams are searching for survivors after devastating floods in South Africa's Eastern Cape province. At least 49 people have died. And we look at how Myanmar's gold rush is sparking health and environmental concerns in Thailand.
Daily warmth and nightly warmth. In case at the moment, the satellite picture briefly showed some cloud, maybe in Greece, but that's it now. There are showers developing as the days get warmer and warmer. They're very light ones dotted around southern Turkey, more likely to the east and across the border. The breeze isn't that strong across the Bosphorus, so 29 in Istanbul should feel like 29. It's a light breeze onto the coast of Egypt as well. The temperatures are rising rapidly to 30 inland, and if you keep going eastwards, to well over 40 in Iraq. That's not a big surprise. And of course, further south throughout the Arabian Peninsula, 40 plus is fairly typical this time of the year, except in Salalah, catching the edge of the monsoon at the moment. Looks pretty dry. There are occasional showers in the mountains of Yemen, even Oman, but it's not a big thing. Baghdad tends to get a bit hotter. We're up to about 49 in the forecast by Friday, and there's little wind around the Gulf, so despite the temperatures being in the 40s, it's going to be feeling pretty humid, sticky, particularly late at night and in the early morning. In Africa, the coast in the east is still getting hit by the monsoon breeze, so rain is likely now in Somalia rather than elsewhere. Bigger showers are further west, as far north as the Central African Republic, and as far west as probably Equatorial Guinea or the Republic of Congo.
A weekly look at the world's top business stories.
Do we need to worry about Trump's tariffs? How is all of this going to play out and affect all of us and the rest of the world?
From global markets and economies.
Europe has been extraordinarily successful at coping with the loss of Russian gas.
To understand how it affects our daily lives.
Do you see Germany returning to its status as the economic powerhouse of Europe anytime soon?
Counting the cost on Al Jazeera.
Time for a look at the headlines now here in Al Jazeera. The US State Department says it's reducing its diplomatic presence in Iraq. It comes as nuclear talks between Iran and the United States appear to be deadlocked. President Donald Trump says he's less confident about the prospects for a deal. 75 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli attacks across Gaza on Wednesday. More than 40 were killed at a controversial food distribution center backed by Israel and the US. Witnesses say the Israeli army has been attacking people queuing for food. And a second night of curfew is enforced in Los Angeles following days of violence and mass protests against US government immigration raids. More protesters were detained on Wednesday, adding to the almost 400 arrests since demonstrations began over the weekend. Labor protests have spread across Colombia's three largest cities to demand worker and healthcare reforms. It comes as the country reels from dozens of coordinated bomb attacks that killed 7 people. Well, this happened just days after a presidential hopeful was shot in the head in the capital. Alessandra Rampietti reports from Bogotá.
A day after a wave of bombings shook the country, union members and President Gustavo Petro supporters marched in Bogotá and other cities, demanding a referendum on labor reform, despite a Senate debate on an alternative bill.
Congress has turned its back on us. They didn't want to study or vote on our reform. So now we, the people, are asking to be heard and vote in a popular consultation. All workers deserve better conditions and the chance at dignified, respectful work.
The marches came as Colombia reeled from Tuesday's coordinated attacks in the southwest that killed 7, just days after opposition senator and presidential hopeful Miguel Uribe Turbay was shot at a campaign event in Bogotá. The Senate has rejected Petro's request to hold a referendum, which legally requires congressional approval. But on Wednesday, the president signed a decree to push ahead anyway, despite critics calling it unconstitutional.
This rally is meant to show support for President Petro's labor reform, but it's happening at a time of growing unrest. Still, the president is pressing ahead, determined to bring his reforms directly to the people, even if it means fueling more tension.
In Cali, Colombia's third largest city and the site of 2 of Tuesday's attacks, some had called for the rallies to be cancelled due to the violence. But Petro insisted the referendum must go to a vote.
It's not true that the popular vote or social justice are enemies of peace or allies of violence. Those who shouted that in the heat of the moment, maybe out of anger, I can understand. But the politicians repeating it are wrong. They're fueling unrest and escalating violence. I was elected to make peace.
In the meantime, the Senate debated a separate bill, one that unions say falls short on protecting workers' rights. Lawmakers hope a compromise can avoid the need for the referendum, though some say they feel pressured to legislate under these tense conditions.
It's hard to carry on as if nothing has happened. Violence isn't inevitable like death, and we can't normalise it. This wasn't just an attack on a candidate. There were 19 terrorist acts in one day. Our democracy and freedoms are at risk.
Amid all the tension, there was good news from the clinic treating Uribe Turbay. Doctors say he's still in critical condition, but is showing signs of neurological improvement. A glimmer of hope in an increasingly fractured nation. Alessandro Rampietti, Al Jazeera, Bogotá.
Police in Northern Ireland have condemned a third night of riots, describing the violence as racist thuggery. Well, hundreds of masked rioters have attacked police and set homes and cars on fire in Ballymena. It follows a court case involving 2 Romanian-speaking teenage boys accused of sexually assaulting a teenage girl in the town. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has condemned the violence and called for calm. Emergency services are trying to help survivors in the immediate aftermath of deadly floods in South Africa's Eastern Cape province. At least 49 people have been killed. Paul Ging reports.
Extreme cold weather has brought heavy rain and snow, followed by flooding. Students whose school bus was caught in floodwaters are among the victims.
We mourn the tragic loss of children whose scholar transport was swept away in floodwaters. The number of people confirmed to have been in the minibus, it's 13 learners with 2 adults, the driver and the assistant to the driver.
Disaster response teams are working across the Eastern Cape province and neighbouring KwaZulu-Natal. They say they're working with families to find out who's still unaccounted for. Many residents say they had no time to think of anything but saving their lives.
The floodwater woke me up in the morning between 6 and 7. The water pushed the door open. It rushed into my house, moving furniture around, the fridge, the TV, the gas stove. I couldn't grab any of those things, so I just had to save myself.
If my child hadn't been crying, it would have been worse. We're heavy sleepers. If he hadn't cried, we wouldn't have woken up.
The rain and snow has also disrupted transport and power networks. Authorities have shut major roads in the 2 affected provinces to try to minimise further casualties. Paul Ging, Al Jazeera.
Ukraine says the bodies of 1,212 of its soldiers killed in the war with Russia have been brought home. Photographs released by Russian authorities show what Moscow says is the moment of transfer. The Kremlin said Ukraine had returned the bodies of 27 Russian soldiers. On Wednesday, a concentrated Russian drone attack on the Ukrainian city of Kharkiv killed at least 3 people and injured dozens. In Bolivia, at least 3 people have been killed during violent confrontations between supporters of ex-President Evo Morales and police. Well, security forces fired tear gas and rubber bullets at protesters who responded with rocks, firecrackers and tires. Morales' supporters are demanding he be allowed to run in the August presidential election. Earlier this month, the Constitutional Court upheld a 2-term limit on presidents. Morales has already served 3 terms. Brazil's Supreme Court has decided to make social media companies liable for illegal posts by users. It's seen as a landmark ruling and comes amid reports of fraud, child pornography and violence becoming common amongst teenagers online. Critics say it could threaten free speech as platforms preemptively remove content judged to be potentially problematic. Toxic runoff from unregulated mines in Myanmar has sparked health and environmental concerns across the border in Thailand. Thai authorities have detected arsenic levels nearly 5 times the acceptable limit. Tony Cheng reports now from Bangkok.
In the muddy waters of northern Thailand, fishermen cast out their lines. But they're not looking for fish. They're collecting samples to try and find out what's been poisoning the waterways and their source of income. When we